Hey y'all, my name is Cassie and I am the creator of Pieces of Scrap, and in today's video I wanted to do another free Amigurumi pattern review, and these are all patterns that you can find on Instagram. And before we get into my reviews of these patterns, I like to go over the criteria I use to rate the patterns, and those are three things. The first thing is, would I ever use the pattern again? I like to have patterns that I can make easily for market prep, so those are patterns that work up pretty quickly, and then also patterns that I really like for like commissions and stuff like that. I like to have some of those kind of patterns in my repertoire in case anybody ever requests a specific pattern that I might not have. Number two is, can I easily understand the pattern? And the biggest thing about this is, if I wasn't a kind of intermediate to advanced crocheter, I would want to be able to understand the instructions easily. Are the instructions really thorough? Is it easy to understand, you know, what the pattern designer is saying in the instructions? And kind of just making sure it's fully fleshed out and tested and the pattern makes sense to everybody, not just a select few people. And number three is, do I end up liking the finished product? I want a pattern that comes out to be a cute thing. I don't want to waste my time making something that I don't like in the end. So with that, let's get started. So the first pattern I reviewed is this kitty in a bee costume. This is a pattern by Milky_Sizu, and it took me just under 2 hours to put together. It is fairly involved, this pattern, and there's lots of parts. So the arms are a separate part, the body, the head, the hood, the ears, the wings are all separate parts, and then the antenna are crocheted directly into the hood after you assemble it. And then the tail is just something that I added on. I used the same technique as I used explained by the pattern from the antenna to make the tail. It does pretty well to kind of cover up the color changes back here. It makes it less noticeable, and it's a cat. It needs a tail, I think, to make it more like a cat. The picture that the pattern designer provides looks a little bit different than mine. She uses cutout felt to put on all of the face decorations. So the blush, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, that's all felt. But I used safety eyes and embroidered my bits and pieces of the face. And then another thing about my face, how it's different than hers, is because she uses felt pieces to add on her face details, there's not a whole lot of instruction on where to place things. So I kind of just guessed and compared what I was doing to the pattern to kind of place things. And then another thing, the last thing, is because I use safety eyes, I had to put the safety eyes on before I stuffed the head and put the hood on the head, because you have to put on the backs. You have to fasten the backs to the safety eyes. So that is also something that kind of tripped me up on the placement of the eyes and so on. So the way the pattern works is, you make the head, you stuff the head, you close it, and then you make the hood, and the hood is kind of just like slid on to the head and sewn around the head. So it's not like a detachable piece, it's part of the head now. So I wouldn't have been able to kind of figure out where this area was going to encompass, like what was going to be left over from the hood being put onto the head ahead of time when I was putting my facial features on. If I would have known that, I would have waited to add the blush, the embroidering of the mouth and the nose until I had the hood on there, so that worst case scenario, the only thing that might be a little wonky was the eyes, but I still think he came out pretty cute, considering he kind of has like this big chubby face that kind of feels like it's like bursting from the hood, which is kind of hilarious in my opinion. My only other note was that I thought the wings were too far apart in the pattern, so I kind of just put them together. In her pattern, she places them kind of like behind the arms, and there's this big space in the middle that shows off that color changing thing that I'm trying to hide. So that's partially why I put them on there, but I also just think it's really cute, and most bee wings are, at least for crochet pieces, are like really close together and practically one piece. So that's why I placed them the way I placed them. It's not like that in the pattern though. So all that being said, I think it's a pretty cute pattern. I was really worried when I was making the head and the hood that it wasn't going to turn out looking like it was supposed to, and I was really worried that the hood was going to be way too big for the head and all that, but after it's all together, it looks great. I love how it turned out. There are a few hiccups in the pattern, and I already talked about those, but overall I'd give it 4 stars out of 5. Next up, we have the Leggy Heart by J. Adams Collection. This is a new pattern that just got posted to Instagram. Before, it was only available on Ribbler, but she requested that I review her pattern, and so I told her, just make sure you have it on Instagram before I post the video so that I can review it as an Instagram pattern review, and that's what I did. She posted it like almost immediately after I requested her to post it on Instagram, so I was able to truly test it as an Instagram pattern review, so that was awesome of her. Thank you. So yeah, this pattern took me 30 minutes to make. Their really quick market prep make. I have a market coming up in February, on February 10th, and it's a love fest kind of Valentine's Day market, so these will be great for that. I'm gonna prep a bunch more and a bunch more like Valentine's themed things for that, so these are what they turned out looking like. They're really cute. Completely no-sew, which is awesome. The instructions for the arms, it wasn't super obvious that you were supposed to slip stitch into the second chain, so it kind of tripped me up. The first arm that I made, I had to go ahead and unravel after I made the second arm because I was like, oh, that's the way you're supposed to do it, and I just couldn't quite figure it out the first time around. So you chain X number of chains, I can't remember, I think it's 9, and then you slip stitch into the second one from the hook, chain 1, slip stitch into that same stitch that you slip stitched in before, and then chain 1 again to make the third finger, and you slip stitch into that same chain again, and then you either slip stitch or single crochet back up the arm. So yeah, that was a little thing I got tripped up on. And then another thing was, I think there needs to be a note somewhere to use the yarn tail from in between the 2 bumps to close up this hole that is made in the middle when you attach them. There's, from what I remember, there's not like a chain in between the 2, you just attach them, and this hole is meant to kind of close up and make this heart shape up top, whereas like for a pattern for, you know, like a standing pig or a standing cow or a teddy bear or anything of that sort, usually you make 2 legs and then you make a chain in the middle so that you kind of have this, it's not as close as a seam as this one, because this one is kind of trying to become a heart and have that kind of triangular seam in the middle. So I think what is needed there is just some instruction for when you fasten off the first bump to leave kind of a long enough tail so that you can sew up this hole in the middle and not have any gapping when you're filling up the heart. There is instruction to do that, but I think it's just too late in the pattern. I think when she says there's a gap, there might be a gap in the center, it's like after you have already fastened off from the first bump, so it's just too late in the pattern to be noting that you might need to sew up that gap. So my recommendation to J. Adams Collection would be just to move that note somewhere else in the pattern so that you know sooner that you should leave kind of a tail so you can sew up that hole. So that being said, I give this pattern 4 stars out of 5, another really good one. Next pattern I reviewed is the Pocket Panda by knots_by_Jack, so knots by Jack. And I really liked this pattern. I actually want to make a bunch of these because they work up super quickly. They work up under 30 minutes, they're 24 minutes. I definitely prefer this hot pink nose over the light pink nose. I feel like this kind of stands out more and it's really cute. It's not as obvious that that's a nose on this panda. One more note about the nose is that in the pattern it's not actually a nose, it's a mouth, it said. It's just like a straight line in between the eyes, but every single time that I had seen the pattern, and I was thinking about making this pattern forever but just could never find any Parfait Chunky in black because they were just always sold out. Finally got some now. I always interpreted that little line in between the eyes to be a nose, not a mouth. So when I came across the pattern and was making it for the first time, I was really surprised that it said mouth. I was like, that's a nose. When has it ever been a mouth? So I went ahead and kind of just embroidered a nose instead of that straight line onto mine. I think it comes out really cute. Little cat looking nose. It's cute. So one of the things that got me stuck on this pattern was row 10 is just a little bit off. It's when you put in your second row of bobble stitches, and I think they were just like a little bit skewed. It tells you to single crochet 6, whereas the first set of bobble stitches you single crochet 5 and then bobble stitch. So the bottom bobble stitch for the first leg would be like off 1. It would be kind of weird. And then to offset that, there's the same amount of stitches in between the legs, so it's not like you're putting them like slightly inside of the arms like in my Broccoli Boy pattern. It's just they're supposed to line up, but they don't line up. So I went ahead and just repeated the steps for row 8 instead of row 10 to make these legs line up properly. Those were the only notes I have for this pattern. I really, really liked it. I would give it 5 stars. I plan to make a bunch of these for market prep. So next up we have a pattern pack by C Mart Design Shop. We've got a giraffe and a cow, and they're super mini and cute. Great for velvet yarn and chenille yarn that has a smaller weight than chunky yarn. So first up, let's look at this cow pattern. This cow pattern took me 32 minutes to make, and honestly had a lot of problems with this pattern. So the first thing that I kind of tripped up on was the bobble stitches that are made to make the legs. It wasn't super clear how you were supposed to make them. I think in their instructions they say to double crochet 4 times to make a bobble stitch, but I took that probably as literally as it could be taken, just putting 4 double crochets in a single stitch. And then because of that, now that I think back on it, I probably had 4 extra stitches per bobble stitch in this row, which is probably why I had some difficulty in row 11 when I was trying to place my decreases. I had way too many stitches because of that, and it was kind of hard to figure out where I was supposed to put those decreased stitches because of that. The next thing that kind of gets me a little upset about the pattern is that the tail is just super long. This is a cow. I don't think cows' tails are this long, especially with you know, the sizing here, like proportionate to the body, the tail is probably about the same height. It's 9 chains, and it's just too many in my opinion. It's too long. It's like a cat tail almost. I think it could probably do without as many chains, maybe like 2 chains max or 3 chains max for the tail. So definitely too long. And then something else is for row 6, there were not enough room for all the stitches that were written for that row. I had to put 2 separate increases into the last stitch to get the amount of stitches that were needed for that row. So I don't know if that's like a mistake or I'm not sure. And then definitely the last thing is the eye placement is very wonky. He kind of reminds me of that guy from the Goonies. I think his name is like Crunk or Crud or something like that. I can't remember his name. Comment down below if you remember what his name is. But it kind of reminds me of that because his like eye is like sliding down his head almost. Like this one looks okay, but then this one is like way off, like behind almost in his ear. And again, I can't remember if it even gave me like instructions about eye placement. Another thing that could be contributing to it is if the rows are too narrow, it kind of creates a spiral, and it's really obvious when a spiral is, you know, lopsided if you're placing eyes, because this side is probably taller than this side, which attributes to why this eye is very wonky. So yeah, so that's the little cow pattern. I also think he looks like a goat and not a cow. He doesn't have any spots, but I mean, he can be a cow if he wants to, I guess. But yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of this pattern, part of the pattern pack. He's cute from some angles, but definitely not from the front. There was a lot of difficulty involved in this pattern. so I would give it 2 stars. The second pattern in the pack was this giraffe, and it is mostly based off of the same pattern, so you can imagine my disappointment. So first up, it took 45 minutes to make him. I didn't have as many problems as the cow because I made the cow first. I knew what to expect in terms of how I was going to have to problem solve for this one. Biggest thing for me was that because of the spiral thing I was talking about for the cow, this leg ended up being way taller than the rest of them. As you can tell, if I had placed the eyes on this side of the giraffe, I wouldn't have had the problem that we're encountering where the leg is very obviously higher than the others. Because of how and when you're supposed to place the eyes, I didn't know which side to place the eyes. It doesn't tell you. My recommendation about that would be to tell the reader how many stitches from where the round starts you should place the eyes so that it ends up on the right side of the giraffe. I had the same problem with row 12 of the giraffe as I did with row 6 of the cow, where at the end of the row I didn't have enough room to place the additional stitches that were needed and called for that row, so I had to place 2 increases in the same stitch once again to make up for the stitches that I needed and couldn't add anywhere. So that might also contribute to why he looks a little wonky. And then again, for the giraffe, the tail is super long again. What I liked about this pattern, which was really cool to make it a little less sewing, was for the mane of the giraffe that goes all the way back down to the tail. The mane and the tail are all one piece. The tail being as long as it is, I think it just kind of throws it off again. It doesn't seem right that the tail is that long. So this pattern I would also rate 2 stars. Unfortunately, wasn't a fan of it. Next up, we have the Tiny Elephant by Crafting in Glory. And I have 2 kind of slightly different ones, as you can tell here. So this one has bigger eyes, and I also did the ears as she calls for them to be done in her instructions. And then this one, I did the ears slightly differently, like extremely slightly differently. All I did differently on this one was instead of just fastening off the ears, I slip stitched so that they could be symmetrical and have the right side facing out on both sides. This one, they're a teardrop shape because you don't slip stitch into them, so to make them symmetrical on each side, one of them has to have the wrong side stitches facing out, which I don't think is super noticeable, but if somebody who crochets noticed that, I think it would be super obvious to them. So let me know in the comments down below if you prefer the larger eyes or the smaller eyes, and if you prefer the slip-stitched ears or the teardrop ears. Just let me know. I would like to hear your opinion on that. Anyway, this is just another super quick market prep pattern. These take 27 minutes to make. It is no sew, which I was super surprised about because nowhere in like the title page of the pattern does it say it's no sew, and it doesn't say it in the description. It was a very, very happy surprise to learn that this was no sew. How you start the pattern is you make the trunk and the ears separately, and then later you single crochet them into the body, which makes it no sew. What I loved about this pattern is that there were so many pictures included in the pattern to kind of walk you through how to attach your no sew connections, which was awesome. It was really, really helpful. I think it's also really helpful for beginners to see those pictures. And so I kind of incorporated that into my own pattern that I've been working on, the broccoli pattern. So we'll talk about that later. Yeah, I really appreciated all the pictures that were in the pattern and how detailed and thought through all of her instructions were. It definitely seemed like she tested it on her own multiple times at least, so that she could really flesh out this pattern and be as thorough as possible about anything anybody might get tripped up on. The only thing that was a little weird to me was the trunk and the ears. The way that she wrote out the instructions for them was a little confusing for me, specifically because the magic ring doesn't count as a row, which isn't super obvious. In the pattern instructions for the trunk specifically, it says make a magic ring, and then rows 1 through 3 you single crochet around. So 1 through 3 are separate rows from the magic circle, which is weird. Specifically because I think most people count the magic ring as a row, and in this own pattern, when she does the body, her magic ring for the body counts as the first row, but for the ears and the trunk, it doesn't. And it's not super obvious for the trunk, which is the first piece that you make, that that magic ring isn't the first row, but it is more obvious for the ears that the magic ring is not the first row. The last thing that I wish was included in this pattern is she actually doesn't use safety eyes in her photo. Her eyes are just color changes that she makes in the row, and I really wish she provided instructions on how she did that. So that being said, I give this pattern 4 stars out of 5. I'll definitely be coming back to it in the future, but there's still a few hiccups in the pattern that I think need to be addressed before I could give it 5 stars. Last but not least is the Pug Pattern by Nooks and Hooks, and unfortunately I didn't have any browns so that I couldn't make like a true pug. So I think this one kind of looks like a cow to me, and then this one kind of looks more like a pug than the other one. But I really like how this pattern turned out. It took me 32 minutes to make these little guys, and the pattern wasn't super thorough in instructions. I think it's kind of a beginner pattern, but I think it's missing some kind of key things to make sure the pattern turns out the way it's intended to. Specifically, there was no instruction on how to place the eyes. There wasn't instructions about what row you're placing the eyes on or how many stitches are in between the eyes, so I kind of had to eyeball it and look at the picture and then place the eyes how I thought they should be placed. And then on top of that, there wasn't a number of stitches for each row in parentheses behind each row's instructions, so this tripped me up specifically on one of the earlier rows because I was doing increases and I think I got distracted and didn't do as many as I needed, or I did too many, and so I had to go back and kind of figure out how many stitches were supposed to be in that row based on math, which I'm not good at, instead of just being told how many stitches were supposed to be in that row. And then another note was the instructions for this little mouth muzzle piece. It's not obvious that when you're making it, it's made not in a magic circle, it's made by a chain, and then you're working in a circle around that chain. It's not obvious that once you get to the end of the chain that you're continuing your work around the chain. So I think that's something that might need to be looked into on how to write that so that people know that you're working around the chain instead of just not knowing what to do. And then the last thing was the instructions for the tail. I would alter that so that you slip stitch back up the tail into the body so that you hide that loose end that is created when you fasten off, because the way that it's written is you just chain off of the body, and if you were to fasten off that way, you would probably have some shedding happening because that loose end isn't like tucked back into the body as it would be if you slip stitched back into the body. And then the final thing was there wasn't instructions about where to place the muzzle or the ears when you sew them on, so that was a little difficult as well. I was kind of just eyeballing it with the picture once again to figure out where those pieces are supposed to go. So that being said, I think it's a good pattern for people who are well versed in amigurumi and know what they're doing and know how to do these basic things. I think for a beginner it might be more difficult, especially since there's not instructions about, like, thoroughly written out instructions about what you're doing and how you're doing it and stuff like that, and like the number of stitches and things like that I think are important to very new beginners. And so with that, I would give this pattern 4 stars out of 5. So that kind of wraps up our free pattern review video for today, but as you can probably tell, there's something that we haven't addressed that's on screen, and that is that I have released a new pattern. My first pattern ever for amigurumi. I've released an earring pattern before, but this is my first amigurumi pattern, and it is the baby broccoli boy. He is available both on Instagram for free and on Etsy for a small price. This pattern released yesterday morning, and so make sure you take a look at it, and if you're interested in purchasing it, purchase it off Etsy, or if you want a free pattern on Instagram, make sure you check me out on Instagram. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I'll be posting a new video next Tuesday and every Tuesday in the future. So make sure you hit that subscribe button if you enjoy my videos, and leave a comment down below what you're working on. I'd like to hear what you are working on. So I'll see you guys next time. Thanks. Bye.